Hey fellow watchers of the multiverse. Welcome to yet another exciting episode of If I Had Written. This series dives into cancelled projects, pre-writes, rewrites, and custom projects, giving you a glimpse of what might have been and what could have been. Today we dive into the Amazing Spider-Man Maximum Carnage. I'm thrilled to announce that Miss the Part has returned with a bang. I'm finally back and we've revamped the channel. We're rolling out tons of new fan fictions, original stories, and you can expect to see a lot more new series and exciting content on the channel. And make sure to check out our Patreon and Substack for exclusive perks and behind the scenes content and even your own stories that you may either commission or you may even request. By becoming a member means you'll be getting early access to videos, special updates, and the chance to support more amazing projects on this channel, such as the brand new animated series that we just did on the channel with over 10 brand new episodes. So if you haven't seen those, I would highly recommend that you check them out. So stay tuned and join us on this brand new epic journey through the multiverse. Like I said, my fellow watchers, it's good to be back. Location: Ravencroft Institution for the Criminally Insane. A guard walked through the halls of the Ravencroft Institution, home of the nation's craziest criminals. Following closely behind was a man. He was obviously well connected to have been allowed into the building. None of the inmates at the Ravencroft Institution were allowed visitors. This visitor was the only exception yet. The guard stopped in front of the door, and it was made out of reinforced steel. He swiped his security keycard through a slot in the wall, and the door buzzed open. The guard stepped aside and allowed the mystery man to walk through. He then closed the door, sealing the visitor and the prisoner in the room. The visitor looked around the cell that held Cletus Cassidy, the insane mass murderer. Cassidy looked up at his visitor and asked who he was and what he wanted. The man took off his hat and spectacles and introduced himself as Dr. Otto Octavius. He said that he was Cassidy's redemption. On saying that, Dr. Octavius's trench coat was ripped off, and his four hidden Ankinator arms emerged. Cassidy smiled for the first time in a long time. A few minutes later, Octavius and Cassidy walked out of Ravencroft, leaving several dead guards and medical personnel in their wake. Location: Science Expo, New York City. The Science Expo was happening in New York, and it featured the country's best and brightest in the field of science and technology. The arena was filled with several young and aspiring scientists, majority of whom were college students. In the crowd also was Eddie Brock. He was there as a photographer, taking several shots of the ongoing events. Peter Parker was also in the crowd. He only attended because he was intrigued and wanted to know what the country's greatest minds in science were working on. Standing on the dais and addressing the crowd of starry-eyed scientists was Dr. Otto Octavius, world-renowned scientist. The crowd cheered him on as he announced plans to improve the human race by using technology as light to counter the darkness in the world. He further mentioned that he was on the brink of engineering the human genome to be stronger than ever before. He retorted back that his discovery would upgrade humans into super beings, capable of conquering anything and everything. The crowd roared in approval. Peter Parker, however, wasn't impressed. While Dr. Octavius's remarks were exciting and electrifying, it was deeply concerning to him. He wondered how Dr. Octavius planned to upgrade human beings. His choice of the word super was also disturbing. To him, A scientist who wanted to create superhumans wasn't exactly a good thing. Peter reached into his pocket and felt the spandex fabric of his Spider-Man mask. He pulled it out and wore it over his head. He attached his web shooters to his hands. He then tore off his regular clothes to reveal the Spider-Man suit he wore underneath. He shot a web onto the ceiling and jumped out, swinging himself forward and landing on the stage. The crowd gasped, and Dr. Octavius turned and faced the intruder. He was surprised to see Spider-Man. Spider-Man then asked him what he was up to this time, addressing him as a mad scientist. Octavius replied that he was simply trying to better the lives of humanity. Peter saw Octavius gripping his briefcase tightly. There had to be something sensitive in there that the man didn't want anyone to see. Peter then shot his webs at the box and pulled it to the floor. It fell and popped open. A small device rolled out and clattered to the floor. Octavius gasped. Peter noticed his reaction, but he didn't get a good look at the device, because just at that moment, he heard a commotion as security guards were bouncing up on the stage to tackle him. He simply shot his webs to the ceiling. It caught on the stage lights and he yanked the webs, pulling the stage lights onto the security guards. The action prompted the crowd to panic, and they began to run. It was a stampede everywhere. In the commotion, Octavius picked up his device, stashed it into the briefcase, and got away as Spider-Man was occupied with the security guards. Meanwhile, in the crowd, Eddie Brock was busy clicking away with his camera while trying hard not to be jostled by the crowd and trampled on. While trying to starve off the attack by the security guards, Peter noticed the flash of Brock's camera. His mind did some quick work, and he realized that if those photos ever got out, his reputation as a heroic Spider-Man would be ruined. He shot out his web at the camera, and it hit its mark, and he pulled back the web and smashed the camera onto the floor, breaking it into smithereens. Brock screamed in protest. He got angry and he started feeling himself slipping away. Oh shit, he signed, as he had done with it for many times before. The Venom symbiote took the chance and transformed out of Eddie. The crowd around Venom screamed, and they scrambled away. Venom then charged at Spider-Man. There would be yet another rematch. In a deep voice, the security guards abandoned Spider-Man, and they fled. One, however, got unlucky and his head was eaten by the symbiote. It grew larger as a result of the food. Spider-Man saw this and he tried taking Venom on. However, his blows and punches did no good. The Venom symbiote pinned him to the floor and began punching him in turn. Parker blocked some of the blows. Then Peter asked what Venom wanted now, and Venom replied, revenge. Peter took that to heart, as he knew previously that he left Eddie abandoned, beaten, and bloodied at the New York park. More security personnel were coming, and these ones were heavily armed. Peter had no intentions of being fired on by heavy guns. The fight with the Venom symbiote simply wasn't worth the risk. He had to get away. The big guns arrived and they began firing at the stage. Venom took most of the bullets and they didn't seem to do any damage to him. Peter simply got away using the backstage exit. With Spider-Man gone, Venom charged at the SWAT team and bit off the heads of every one of them. With each head he ate, he grew bigger in size. With no assailant coming after him, Venom escaped from the arena. Location: Octavius' secret research lab. Dr. Otto Octavius was giddy with excitement when he entered his laboratory. He walked over to where he had bound Cletus Cassidy. He told Cassidy that he had publicly announced his plans for humanity. Cletus asked how the crowd had taken the news. Octavius replied that they were excited about the prospects, and the two men laughed manically. Octavius then suddenly stopped laughing. He said that there was a problem. Spider-Man had confronted him right there on the stage. On hearing Spider-Man, the smile disappeared from Cletus Cassidy's face. Octavius said the masked vigilante suspected something. He even said that Spider-Man saw the mind control device, but he doubted that Spider-Man knew what the device could do. Cassidy then told Octavius not to worry. He could always handle Spider-Man anytime. Octavius then turned to Cassidy. He pushed a button with one of the Akinator arms, and Cassidy's shackles came off. He then asked Cassidy to show him what he got. Then Cassidy's flesh disappeared, and from it emerged the sticky goo of a red and scary symbiote. Dr. Otto Octavius smiled at his creation. Location: Peter Parker's home. Mary Jane was busy in the kitchen when she heard a small racket coming from the living room. She didn't need any further sign to know that her vigilante boyfriend had returned. She emerged from the kitchen in time to see Peter Parker pulling off of his Spider-Man mask to reveal a banged-up face. He looked at her with a deer-in-the-headlights look. Both adults were silent for a moment, and Peter broke the silence, saying that he really tried to come in silently. MJ laughed and asked him to come in for a hug. He leaped across the room to her and planted a kiss on her lips. Just as he hugged her, he pulled away from her and said that he better go shower. He sniffed himself and made a face as if he was going to vomit. MJ laughed at this, and then Peter said that he'll go shower. He gave her another kiss and then bounced up to the stairs to their bathroom. Minutes later, they sat down to eat lunch. When they were done, Peter moved to the living room and sat on the sofa. MJ joined him and they put on the TV. The aim was to see a movie, but Peter flickered to a news channel briefly, and what he saw shocked him. Mary Jane gasped as she saw the horrifying images on the news. A huge monster was on the loose in downtown New York, terrorizing Times Square. The news images showed Venom chewing the heads of innocent civilians. With each head, the monster grew bigger. Several attack helicopters were on the scene and firing on Venom, but they were unsuccessful in taking down the monster. Peter looked at MJ, and their eyes met. She didn't hesitate for 1 second. She told him to go. He bounced up the stairs, retrieved his suit from the clothes dryer, and left the house. Location: downtown New York. Peter swung his way to Times Square, and the scene that greeted him was like something out of a horror movie. He stood on one of the high-rise buildings and surveyed the situation. The cops seemed to be tired of taking on Venom as they were losing. 5 choppers were down, and several headless bodies were being loaded onto the ambulance. The TV crews kept their distance, but they were capturing everything. One of them found him, and suddenly the TV screens on the buildings around Times Square were broadcasting Spider-Man. The cops and onlookers looked around and they began cheering. Peter didn't need any more encouragement. He leapt down from the building and swung at Venom, kicking the symbiote square in the face. The kick did a number on Venom, but he recovered very quickly. Spider-Man was swinging in to take another shot at him, but this time, he saw it was coming and prepared. And when Spider-Man was closing enough, Venom slapped him away with a simple flick of the wrist. Spider-Man went flying into a building, damaging the LED screen attached to it. Spider-Man recovered and stuck to the building to steady himself. Venom then charged at him, and he thought fast and shot webs directly at Venom's eyes, momentarily blinding his vision. Venom clawed at his eyes. Peter took the opportunity and swung around Venom, taking time to tie his webs around the monster. He also tied the webs around the monster's legs. When Venom had successfully clawed away the webs from his eyes, he tried moving, but he tripped and fell face down on the ground. The crowd cheered Spider-Man for finally putting the monster on the ground. Peter then stood and waved to the crowd, basking in the glory of his praises. But Venom flexed his body, expanding his symbiotic muscles. As he did so, the webs around his body grew, taut, and snapped. No one saw this. He spied Spider-Man standing not too far away from him. He opened his mouth and his ridiculously long tongue shot out. The crowd gasped. The tongue caught Spider-Man on his leg, wounded, and wrapped around it and yanked him all the way to Venom. When Spider-Man had reached Venom's mouth, Venom simply used his hands and clapped Spider-Man. His tongue released Spider-Man and the hero fell to the ground. Venom then dropped on Spider-Man and began pelting him with successful punches. The security personnel, seeing that their savior was on the ground, opened fire on Venom. Their guns didn't do any damage to Venom, who was still mercilessly punching Spider-Man. Each punch deepened the counter to the ground. By this time, the National Guard had gathered, and they had 2 helicopters hovering around, each loaded off with Hellfire missiles. The choppers fired their payload on Venom, and that seemed to do the trick. The missiles bore a large hole in the middle of Venom's body, and the punches on Spider-Man ceased. As Venom was regenerating, he turned away from Spider-Man and faced the choppers. The choppers then opened fire, firing with their automatic machine guns. And with that, Venom's rage exploded. His symbiotic hands extended to the choppers, wounded around them, and pulled them to the ground. On their way down, one of the choppers fired a missile at Venom. The choppers crashed and the missile hit its mark. It went right into the neck of the monster, blowing away most of the neck and the symbiotic goo around its head. That then exposed the true face of Eddie Brock, whose body the symbiote was using as a host. The news crews around picked up on this, and almost immediately, the face of Eddie Brock was showing on the screens around Times Square, and also was being broadcasted around the world, the villain behind all of the previous attacks. Being exposed and vulnerable, Venom climbed up a building and got away. He needed a place to recover and regenerate his body from the wounds. With Venom gone, the medics came in and picked up Spider-Man. He was unconscious, and in order to give him oxygen, they removed his mask. The TV crew wasted no time, and Peter Parker's face replaced that of Eddie Brock on the screens. 2 minutes later, they identified him as Peter Parker, a man who was dating Mary Jane Watson. At this time, Peter Parker was en route to the hospital. Location: Peter Parker's home. Mary Jane had stepped away from the living room. She decided to take a break from the horrors of the news coverage of the Times Square attack. She was removing the dishes from the dishwasher and wiping them when the doorbell rang. She signed and went to the door. As she opened it, dozens of people pushing microphones and cameras and video cameras into her face. Although shocked and confused, she managed to retreat into the house and close the door into their faces. She leaned in on the door, trying to steady her breathing, and she heard one question amidst all others. How do you feel dating Spider-Man? She opened the door again and replied to the question with one of hers. What? Location: Peter Parker's home. It had been a month since the Times Square attack, and Peter had spent 3 weeks in the hospital. He was treated for a couple broken ribs. His superhuman powers was the reason he was still alive. Any other person would have died on the scene. There was no way a regular person would have survived Venom's blows. A lot had happened in the past month. The nation grieved the loss of the security operatives that died at Times Square at the hands of Venom. Eddie Brock was revealed as the journalist working with the Daily Bugle. That piece of information ruined the Bugle. Its stocks tanked and its employees resigned. It was all over for the paper. Venom was still on the loose, and the nationwide manhunt turned up with nothing. Occasionally, a few headless bodies were found, indicating that Venom was still very much alive and on the move. Scientists had taken to the airwaves, being hosted by several television channels to talk about the monster and how a simple journalist happened to be a monster that nobody could kill. The most notable of these scientists was Dr. Otto Octavius, and he seemed to be the only one who knew anything about the monster. He identified it as an extraterrestrial symbiote. It needed a suitable host to survive, but this was a cover-up lie, because Otto had made the symbiote himself with Richard Parker. Otto also talked about how if it came in contact with anyone, it would inhabit such a person's body. The president had visited Peter Parker in the hospital and branded him a national hero. But Peter didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a guy who went up against a monster he could never possibly win against. When he returned home, he was surprised to see several flowers on his doorstep and on the street, and journalists and news crews were camped outside taking photos of the house. He and his girlfriend didn't have any privacy anymore. Peter was fine now. He was on his feet, and his wounds had healed. He was watching TV, and the anchor was saying that the 2 more headless bodies were found at Brooklyn. The Venom symbiote had claimed another set of victims. The news anchor introduced a guest to talk about the recent headless bodies discovered, and it was none other than Dr. Otto Octavius. Octavius explained that the symbiote was just as every other living organism. It needed to feed to survive, and for some reason it found the human head to be a good source of nutrition. He talked about how the symbiote grew larger at Times Square with each head that it ate. The anchor agreed with him, and Peter found himself agreeing as well. MJ came into the living room and touched his shoulders. He reached and touched her hand, and they silently stayed in that position for a moment, watching the news. He picked up the remote and muted the television. He then said that he needed help. MJ asked what kind of help, and he replied, professional help. She asked why he needed the help for, and he said that he needed it to stop Venom. Mary Jane just signed. Peter turned her head and doubled down on his stance. He said that it had been a month, and the authorities haven't even spotted the guy. They needed his help. MJ held his face and said that he didn't need to convince her. She was all on board. She just wanted him to be safe. He assured her that he will be safe, or at least try to. The last part elicted a small laugh from her. She asked where he would get this professional help from, and he pointed to the TV and said, that guy, Dr. Otto Octavius, was talking on the television. MJ looked at him and narrowed her eyes. She looked back at Peter and said that she thought Peter didn't trust him. Peter shrugged and said that Octavius seemed to be the only one who knew anything about the symbiote, and that, in itself, was something suspicious. Especially after all, he was the one that caused all of this after going into Octavius Industries to get the symbiote. But the man could help him figure out what to do about the Venom problem, because he just kept coming back again and again, and he wasn't going to stop. MJ said that Peter should do what he needed to do. She told him that she had made a new suit for him, and he shouldn't do anything that will make medics put a pair of scissors through it. He smiled, and at that, she said he wouldn't. Location: downtown New York. Peter Parker stood on the room of the building where BNC Studios was housed, and it was the channel that was broadcasting the interview with Octavius. At the time he left his house, he was dressed in his new Spider-Man suit, and it felt good to be out again doing something that he loved. He watched the gate to the underground parking lot of the building. A black executive sedan drove out. Peter knew that it was Dr. Octavius, who was the occupant of the vehicle. He then began swinging around the city, following the vehicle at a safe distance. He followed the vehicle to what looked like an abandoned warehouse by the docks. Octavius got out of the vehicle and the driver drove away. Peter stood at a safe distance observing Octavius. He noticed how the man inputted a security code and the door opened. Peter quickly memorized it. When Octavius got in, Peter emerged from his hiding spot and went to the door and opened it. When he got in, he was surprised by what he saw. He saw a state-of-the-art research facility with equipment he had only seen at Oscorp. But what surprised him more was a man whom Dr. Octavius was speaking to. He watched as Octavius made the man transform into a huge red, symbiotic monster. Peter couldn't take it anymore. He jumped out of his hiding place and revealed himself, startling Octavius and the symbiote monster. Peter said that they now knew why Octavius, such an expert on symbiotes, knew all the information he did, because he was breeding one in his underground research facility. Dr. Octavius replied to Peter, saying that it's funny, Peter thinks he's breeding just one symbiote. He went on to say that all he wanted was to revolutionize the human race, that all humans needed was a symbiotic relationship, and that would make them to be stronger and better. As if Peter might have heard this story before, Peter asked Octavius who the man was. Octavius smiled and introduced Peter to meet Cletus Cassidy, or as he likes to call him, Carnage. At the mention of his name, Carnage began to low a growl. Peter said that the authorities would be interested to know what Dr. Octavius had been up to. Octavius replied that the authorities already had their hands full with Venom, so they weren't on to him. Peter asked Octavius what his endgame was. Octavius replied that his plan was to have everybody in symbiotes. He had completed phase 1 of his plans, and he was now working on phase 2. He explained that phase 1 was the successful transformation of Carnage. Phase 2 was simple, turning the symbiotes loose on the city. Peter had a combat pose and said he won't let Octavius do that. Octavius replied that he won't let Peter stop him. And with that, his Akinator arm shot out from behind him. Peter jumped at Octavius and began punching him. The Akinator arms pulled him away and flung him across the floor. Peter landed painfully, and he thought he heard a rib crack. He ignored the pain and charged at Ock. He fought with Octavius, and he was making some headway. Then Octavius decided to give up. He asked Carnage to take care of Spider-Man while he did what he needed to do. Peter was no match for Carnage, who was stronger than Venom. He took a hell of a beating. Peter tried to get away from Carnage, and as he did so, he saw Ock punch code into a wall and an entire wall side away to reveal several large cryo tanks. Sleeping in suspended animation in these tanks were large symbiotes. Octavius pulled a lever and the doors to the tanks opened. The symbiotes woke up and went out. Peter watched on in horror as Octavius activated a self-destruct mechanic just as the symbiotes left. Octavius turned to Peter and said that the authorities will never get their hands on his tools. He said that he had activated phase 2 a little too early because Spider-Man had forced his hand. Then he and Carnage left the building. Peter looked around and didn't know what to salvage. He swung out of the building just as it exploded behind him. He saw a black van pulling out of the premises and knew that Octavius and Carnage were escaping. They were gone, and several more symbiotes were all over New York City. Location: Peter Parker's residence. Peter was back home and he was feeling defeated. The doorbell rang and he went out to open it. Standing on his doorway was a gray symbiote. He immediately pushed it away from his face. He began attacking it. Surprisingly, it didn't fight back. The journalists outside positioned their cameras and began rolling, capturing everything. Then Mary Jane came out of the house and pulled Peter back. Peter was still hell-bent on attacking the symbiote, but MJ was pulling him back, asking him to stop and calm down. He calmed down. After all, the symbiote wasn't attacking him. MJ asked him why he wasn't attacking the man, and he was confused. He said that he was attacking a symbiote, not a man. MJ told the man that she was sorry for the attack. Peter, confused, looked at the symbiote, and it smiled at him, sticking its tongue at him. He knew then that something was wrong, really wrong. And that is going to be the first part of If I Had Written the Amazing Spider-Man Maximum Carnage. Now, how do you enjoy these If I Had Written episodes where we do pre-writes, rewrites, custom series, different concepts, pitches? It's a crazy series, and I know a lot of you guys have been doing a lot of requests. You want me to do Spider-Man 9, Spider-Man 10. We have so much happening. It's insane. But again, I can't thank you enough, and I do want to relay this information back to you, you fellow watchers, because I just want to say thank you so much for the latest support that you guys have been showing me, especially on the Patreon, on the YouTube community. You guys have become members, and it's just crazy to me that we're seeing such a fluctuation in members and people, you know, really being interested in the channel again. And I do want to say, I would highly recommend that you take a look at the Patreon, as it's starting at just $3 a month, and we're actually going to be working on the What If Season 2 motion comic animated series. So you're going to see a lot more animated content coming soon, but I do want to say thank you so much. And again, part 2 will be coming out soon. So that being said, if you guys do enjoy these videos and would like to see more, do make sure to subscribe, like, share, and turn those notifications on so you and your friends are all up to date with the latest content. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next episode. Take care and have a fantastic day. Peace out.